Hey everyone, this is your host Yoshino. Welcome to Artist Decoded. Today we interviewed Nina Menkes, who is the director of the documentary Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, Power, which premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival. And now let me read you the synopsis. In this eye-opening documentary, celebrated independent filmmaker Nina Menkes explores the sexual politics of cinematic shot design, using clips from hundreds of movies we all know and love, from Metropolis to Vertigo to Phantom Thread. Menkes convincingly makes the argument that shot design is gendered. Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, Power illuminates the patriarchal narrative codes that hide within supposedly classic setups and camera angles, and demonstrates how women are frequently displayed as objects for the use, support, and pleasure of male subjects. Building on the essential work of Laura Mulvey and other feminist writers, Menkes shows how these not-so-subtle embedded messages affect and intersect with the twin epidemics of sexual abuse and assault, as well as employment discrimination against women, especially in the film industry. The film features interviews with an all-star cast of women and non-binary industry professionals, including Julie Dash, Penelope Spheris, Carolyn Yee, Joey Soloway, Catherine Hardwicke, Eliza Hittman, and Rosanna Arquette. And I'm here today with legendary director and screenwriter Columbia Totone. She co-hosted this episode with me, and it was a pleasure to have you on to co-host. And how's it going? How was your day?
Wow. I mean, I'm feeling legendary, obviously.
As you should. You should.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on with Nina. She is such a light, incredible documentary, extraordinarily important message. Yeah. I mean, I can't say enough about her.
Yeah, she's truly incredible. Yeah, this documentary was such a powerful watch. I mean, I think in the episode you said something about watching it 4 seconds in and you're like, oh, I need to be a part of this. Right?
I was hooked. I was like, yes, whatever this is, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that this documentary is extraordinarily important for filmmakers and non-filmmakers alike. I think that her perspective is something that wasn't even something apparent to me as a filmmaker, and the way she articulates it is just really spot on. It's undeniable, really.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, even in the synopsis, it's talking about, all these classic films that have these setups and camera angles and how it's pervasive throughout film, and I think that she was able to break down all of the techniques and really eloquently put together just like an ensemble of people too to talk about the film. And it was just, I felt like it was incredibly impactful, and it's something that everyone needs to see.
Absolutely. I mean, she builds a very, very strong case. And one of the things that I love about Nina and just looking over her career as a filmmaker is that you can go back to some of her original films and see that each one was a milestone leading up to this very documentary. I think that's a really beautiful thing. It's kind of like looking at the evolution of Nina, of what has been in her heart. It's, I think as creatives, they always talk about like finding your voice and leaving a legacy. And I really think it's, this documentary is a really beautiful moment in time of her legacy. A culmination really of what she's been discovering on her own as a creative, what's important to her, what matters, what her lens is, what is the perspective. And along that path, she's really uncovered something that I think is groundbreaking, is really important. It's not obvious, but then again, it really is when she puts together all the pieces. I think it's really powerful. This is certainly an important film for filmmakers and non-filmmakers alike. I think that it's pretty pretty
I agree.
amazing.
I agree. Yeah. And if anyone wants to see Brainwashed, you can go see it at your local theater if you live in Los Angeles or New York. It's going to be coming out tomorrow, October 21st. So hopefully you can all watch it there, or you can watch it on Canopy if you have access to Canopy. But yeah, I agree with you. This is an incredibly powerful documentary, and hopefully it will help push the needle forward in changing consciousness around cinema and narrative filmmaking, and hopefully update it from the past patriarchal ideologies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go see the film and bring your friends.
Yes. Bring your friends, bring your mom, bring your dad.
Friends. Yeah. Yes. And if you are a filmmaker, please, I hope this encourages you to be bold and to use your own lens, use your own perspective, and be mindful of the impact you have as a creative, as a messenger. Your message runs deep and it changes and shapes society. So remember that power that you have in your hands. So.
Totally. Yeah, of course.
And if you work at Netflix, sorry, I was going to say, and if you work at Netflix, please pick this film up. please put it out there to the world, all the Netflix, the Hulu, the Paramount, whatever streaming service.
Totally.
We need to be loud about what Nina has to say.
I completely agree. Well, thanks, Columbia. Thanks so much for being a part of this episode. It was a pleasure to have you on. I mean, you and I have conversations all the time, but it's just really good to hear your perspective and to bring you on the podcast. Yeah. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was a fun one.
Of course. Of course. All right, everyone. So here it is. Our conversation, mine and Columbia's, with Nina Menkes. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah, so Nina, thank you so much for joining us. This is really a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, we are delighted to have you. Incredibly delighted. So
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, so if you can talk about this documentary and what it means to you personally, and also what led you into knowing that you wanted to make this doc specifically.
Well, I think that, the issues that the documentary deals with are issues I've dealt with my whole life, and, professionally and personally. And when the whole, I was aware that there was discrimination against women in the film industry, and probably 94% of women on planet Earth had experienced various forms of sexual harassment and etc. But it wasn't really until the 2015 federal government's investigation into the Hollywood studios, which was instigated by Maria Geiss, who is one of the co-producers on Brainwashed, and she's also one of the interviewees in Brainwashed. She really instigated this whole investigation, which she took the statistics about women directors to the ACLU, and the ACLU was so horrified they took it to the federal government, to the Equal Employment, Equal Opportunity Employment Commission in the federal government, that then started secret negotiations with the Hollywood studios, threatening them with millions, or, I don't even know if it was like billions, but it was many millions of dollars in fines for having such severe sex discrimination, illegal sex discrimination going on in cinema. When that whole thing broke, suddenly women sort of looked around and went, oh, you also had all these problems? Because, I put it for myself. I was like, well, my work's sort of experimental, so that's why no one calls me, or my work really confronts the male gaze, and that's why nobody calls me. But then, it's like, oh yeah, but so-and-so won the top prize, the top audience award at Toronto, and nobody called her either,
Yeah.
And so there was sort of this this growing awareness that what we were facing was a systemic and severe employment discrimination against women in film. And then with the Me Too movement breaking, that whole story kind of opened into global consciousness. There was an environment, an atmosphere, and an openness to think about this issue, which had been sort of percolating in my consciousness probably, since I started making films, which was very young. And I wrote this essay for Filmmaker magazine tying in the visual language of cinema to the twin epidemics of employment discrimination against women and sexual assault, sexual abuse, harassment against women. And this article went viral, which kind of shocked everybody, like the editor of Filmmaker magazine and me. And it became their most popular article of the year.
What year was that?
The Weinstein story broke in the New York Times in October of 2017, and I wrote the article in November of 2017, and it became their most popular article of that entire year.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's really kind of what jump-started it. And then I had this lecture that I would give to my students with like maybe 10 to 15 film clips, sort of pointing out some of the points that I get into in Brainwashed. But after the article, I got invited all over the place to give my talk. The Rotterdam Film Festival, BFI London, Sundance, etc. And whenever I gave the talk, which was again like 10 film clips, people would come up to me and say, "Oh my God, you have to make this into a film so it can reach a wider audience. You can't go around and give the talk to like 50 people here and 50 people there. This has to be made into a film." So that was really how the whole thing got started. Wow.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Columbia, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as a director who's also female, I mean, I watched, Yoshina sent me the trailer. I watched about 4 seconds in, and I was like, wow, like this is amazing. I need to be a part of this. Yoshino, thank you so much to you and Artist Decoded for even having me be a part of this conversation. I think this film is incredibly important. And even, as a female filmmaker, I didn't even, some of the things that you expressed, like the 94% of women who experience sexual harassment or assault, working in the film industry. I'm so hyper aware of these things. I myself, unfortunately, am a part of that statistic. And I never really thought about this perspective of how, the really deep roots of where does this come from? It's like we understand that there's this pervasive issue, but what is the root of it? What's the root cause? And so I was really fascinated to watch the film. And additionally, to just see hand over fist, clip after clip of these iconic films that really, are proof, are showing, how film objectifies women. And furthermore, how that, shapes our society, shapes our culture, even our own belief system as women of our own worthiness. And even right down to, how we get jobs, whether or not you are in the film industry. So yeah, I'm so grateful for this film. I wish we had hours upon end to touch on all the topics, but yeah, it's really amazing. I'm super grateful for this.
Thank you. It means so much to me, and I can speak for all the team members on the film that, when we hear something like that, it makes all the struggle worthwhile. So thank you.
It does. And, for me as a filmmaker, I'm really fascinated by film and its ability to heal. I personally look at film as a healing modality, where it's sort of this non-invasive space to bring segregated ideologies and systems together under one roof to have a conversation that could lead to change and, and might lead to healing. And in your documentary, forgive me if I am butchering her name, but Iyabo Kwayana, the Dartmouth filmmaker, she really touches on, how as filmmakers, we have this great responsibility as messengers in the sense that cinema is so powerful in shaping us, and how, our messages are, as in cinema, it's a place of magnification, that they're amplified. And I'm such a big nerd of like neuroscience and just how cinema actually does have the ability to shape us. And back, I guess it was like a year or two ago, we had on Artist Decoded a psychologist and neuroscientist named Jeffrey Zacks, who wrote a book called Flicker, which is your brain on movies. And, what he says is that what's happening to our brains, like when we're watching film, your brain treats what it's seeing on the screen as if it were real. So it's filing it, emotionally and neurologically as if it has happened. And just how our brains didn't really evolve to watch movies, but how movies have evolved to take advantage of the brains that we have. And, I think in your documentary, Sandra de Castro, Buffington also touched on this in like transportation, which is basically the effect of movies on the viewers, and how, it brings us into this new world and changes our behavior, just like the power of storytelling on the screen, what that has over us neurologically, how it's shaping us. And so, it's like watching your film, there's all of these examples, one after the other, of how, right down to the lighting, the camera movement, the framing, how we are objectifying women. And then when you look at it from a neurological state of how film affects and shapes us, it's just like, it's massive, it runs really deep. The roots are really deep. So, I just think that it's fascinating.
Yeah. And I think something just to add to that, you also give an example of these two films that are side by side, very, very different films. But Yorgo Lanthimos' Killing of a Sacred Deer juxtaposed next to Sleeping Beauty, and how it also changes the perspective of how men see women, in terms of men taking advantage of unconscious women as objects in those two scenes, and how that's ingrained at like a very young age. And so, like, I guess, I'm curious what do you think needs a change in terms of like the narrative point of view? Like what are your what's your take on that?
Well, one thing I want to just say, because it's something that it seems like a lot of people, not everybody, but some people who watch the film seem to get confused about, is sort of there are a couple of different things that can be separated. One is the actual narrative and script and dialogue and characters, right? And then there's what I'm primarily talking about in Brainwashed is I'm isolating the elements of shot design. So, like Columbia said, it's lighting and framing and camera movement and, really specific sound design, really specific elements of the actual shot design. Now, one thing that has come up in various Q&As is that people say, but what about the context? Many of the clips, the context and the shot design are kind of hand in hand, but sometimes the context can mitigate the shot design or exacerbate the shot design or work in a, like a counter way to the shot design or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. So the interesting sort of core thing that we wanted to look at in Brainwashed is, what if you remove context? Because the context goes all over the place, and you see this absolutely core meta message that runs across genres, that runs across decades, and that runs across contexts, and it's always there. So I just wanted to make that point, because it seems like it's a point that sometimes people kind of can get tripped up by saying, well, you know, what they were trying to say, like Blade Runner 2049, he was making a comment on female objectification. Yeah, okay. Sometimes they're making a comment, sometimes they're not making a comment. You know, sometimes it's straight up that, you know, the narrative position, as you were saying, Yoshino, at the narrative perspective is right together with the shot design, is right together with the script, is right together with the dialogue, and they're all pushing us towards the objectification of women and the disempowerment of women. And that's, of course, very often. But there are also a lot of times where, you know, the story is ostensibly not the narrative position of the male, hero. It can be a woman is in, you know, we have an example. I mean, you know, kind of the most classic example being Carrie by Brian De Palma. The main lead character is Carrie, and she's the protagonist, and it's supposedly from her point of view, but shot design undermines that and takes her point of view away from her.
Yeah. Well, so I like how you... Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of clarify that issue, because it seems to be something that some people get tripped up on.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was just going to make a comment about Carrie. I mean, you know, you even made a joke that about like the women's locker room, like you never see people, like you never see women like prancing around naked, you know, like.
I was like, what is this? It's so true, though. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Women frolicking around in the shower there.
Yeah.
Naked, just prancing.
Yeah. Exactly.
In slow-mo, no less, of course.
In slow-mo, yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting how you even like when you interviewed Catherine Hardwicke, the director of Twilight, and how, you know, you're talking about specific shots, and, you know, she was talking about the social and subliminal conditioning that occurs with women directors too. So it's like this kind of within the lexicon of the point of view of film, just in general. So she was talking specifically about like lighting and angles and how to shoot women, and she never really thinks about how to shoot men in terms of like having soft light as opposed to hard light, or, you know what I mean? Because it makes men look more rugged, right? And that's more desirable.
Right.
And so it just kind of is perpetuated. This whole narrative is continue to be perpetuated, and you give like multiple examples of those sort of different films.
Yeah, it's you know, when who was it? Laura Mulvey was saying that, you know, we've been watching movies from the male spectator. And even, you know, some of the films created by females, it's like sometimes the shot choice, you know, we're still seeing that, the same image, the same, you know, perspective. And I was thinking about that. And I know, you know, there will be some scenes, you know, something you're trying to capture, and you're like, oh, I really admired so-and-so, how, you know, this director, how they captured a moment similar. And we try to steal, you know, recreate the same thing. And, you know, just thinking about that, it's like, we're not really capturing the whole story. There's a whole other dimension missing from the experience of what's happening in the scene when we continue to film this way. And I was wondering, have you seen, Netflix just put out the Marilyn Monroe film Blonde. Have you seen this film yet?
I saw it.
What do you think?
I saw
Tell me.
Well, I think that, you know, this is actually a perfect movie. I mean, you know, if it had come out last year, obviously we would have taken lots of clips from Blonde.
Oh yeah.
But Blonde is a very interesting and kind of perfect example where the director was supposedly making or maybe he was trying or maybe he wasn't trying. I mean, we don't know his whole, inner intention here, but as per what he said, it's supposed to be sort of a Me Too movie because she is, and we know this is true in real life, that Marilyn Monroe, as she herself said, spent a lot of time on her knees in Hollywood, and Marilyn Monroe herself has made statements like, if you don't give the studio heads what they want, they'll kill your contract and all this. So none of that is a surprise, and all of it is important. But what happened in Blonde is that through the use of point of view, through the use of camera angles, through the use of lighting, through the use of sexualized slow-mo, through all of these brainwashed techniques, not to mention also in the script, okay, for sure there are issues there. But just because we're focusing on the brainwash side of it, the main character, who was supposedly the protagonist, was disempowered and objectified by the filmmaker, by the camera, by the cinematic techniques. One of the points that we have in Brainwashed is, when is slow-mo used for women and when is slow-mo used for men? And slow-mo for women is used for sexualization, and slow-mo for men is used for action. So you have that. For one example, there's that famous scene where Marilyn Monroe stands on top of the grate and the hot air is blowing up from this thing and her skirt flies up. Everyone's seen this image of Marilyn Monroe. So they spend, I don't know how much actual screen time, but it felt like 10 minutes of her in slow-mo standing on top of the grate and having her dress blow up, and she bends over and you see her underwear and it just goes on and on and on and on. It's like sexualization slow-mo. There it is. Towards the beginning, you have the camera. She's walking in to meet somebody for lunch. I forget who. And the camera is a close-up on her derriere as she moves into the restaurant. Well, whose point of view is that? It's certainly not hers. Right. So right away, they're setting up from right at the beginning of the film that the film isn't really her point of view. And, on the level of point of view, and, a number of critics have pointed out the CGI shots that are inside her vagina are point of view. At first, I thought it was the point of view of the abortionist, but then somebody said, no, it's the point of view of the fetus, because it's like looking, outside of the womb down.
Wow, yeah.
So, it's like not Marilyn Monroe's point of view, right? So you have all of these, and lighting and makeup. She, even at her worst moments, when she supposedly wakes up after the abortion with blood all over her legs, her makeup is still perfect on her face. So it's a great example of how cinematic techniques can objectify a character who's supposedly the protagonist. Now, a lot of people have also complained about just the script, that it didn't show any of her empowering aspects, or it didn't explore her genius, and it had the throaty voice that she used was something that she used sometimes. It wasn't all the time, but they have it like all the way through. So the audio also supports the image of this woman as a sexualized object. So Blonde is really a great example of how plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Still same old, basically, right?
Yeah. It honestly took me like 3 times to get through that film. And I love like the heavy, the deep, the dark, let's like get in there. But man, there was no, personally, I did have, there's some problematic things with the script in terms of, it did show her to be this really helpless character, and it was very victimizing. And in addition to, like you were saying, she just had an abortion and her makeup is perfect, although she's covered in blood. But, I, as a filmmaker, especially everything that we've been through as women who are creatives, in this industry, even when the Me Too moments were happening, I couldn't help but think, we were doing a really good job of, yes, voicing and standing up and advocating and being honest about what's happening in this industry. But I wasn't hearing enough from men. We were doing a great job at saying this is what not to do. But, I'm always a big advocate of like, please, let's do, look to the men who are doing it right. We need to give examples of what that looks like. And, that true equality is this. I had a big brand one time try to force me to hire an all-female crew. And that, because they wanted to tick the box and say, look at us. And while I think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing, for me, equality is quality. And I wanted to put the best people in those positions. And with that said, with this film, I've never really honestly been able to say to myself, well, I feel like this story should have been told by a woman. I don't know. I think, I'm still discovering how I feel about that. But after seeing Blonde, and learning that it was written and directed by a man and it was shot by a man, both, and Chase, I think did a beautiful job cinematically. However, for the point of the story and, for Marilyn's story, I really and then after watching your documentary, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's almost like they made the film just to, come alongside your documentary. Because it just in every aspect is an example of what you're talking about. I didn't get to experience what was Marilyn feeling. Like I really, really felt the predatory essence of how she might have been feeling, or how she was looked upon and preyed upon and abused and used. But I never understood, what does she think about it? Exactly. How does she think about it? And there are elements of this film that, and I think you've used as examples in your documentary, that it's not just the narrative. It really is how we are filming and framing, and right down to the score and the sound design. You had some wonderful examples of how women, if a man's trying to get a woman to have sex with her, or have sex with him, and she's like, no, I don't want to do this. This isn't happening. And then by force, she eventually is yes, okay, fine, I'll give in. And, oh, actually, I'm enjoying this. And I think, just that it sets a stage for, you talk about rape culture and just that kind of abuse. But I think, women watching this and men watching this, how it's shaping, this is how this works. I think it's the same issue with pornography of this isn't actually how pleasure is given and received in reality.
Yeah. I mean, even, you gave a couple examples like Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner in 1982, and then The Postman Always Rings Twice, and then Buffalo 66, and this sort of normalization of violence against women. And it's even seen as, depending on how the music shapes the scene, right? It's even seen as a sensual thing,
exactly.
Some a term of intimacy. So as a man, you would see something like that, right? And then it kind of perpetuates this idea she says no multiple times, but one yes, then you're, then it's okay.
That it's okay eventually. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And more than that, I had a guy come up to me at a screening. I was in Helsinki, Finland, for the film festival, and I was very touched by this. This man came up to me after the film, and he said, I just want to talk to you about this, yes means no thing. And I was like, okay. And he said, but what am I supposed to do? Because women kind of expect that, and I don't know how to handle it. And then, I was saying, because his thing was like, well, it's considered manly and very heterosexual to kind of push for what you want, so if a woman is kind of coy, and women are taught to be coy in dating too, right? So I said to him, and I mean easier said than done, right? But I said to him, well, what happens if we're like honest with each other instead of playing this ridiculous game of performative masculinity and performative femininity?
Totally.
Like, what happens if you say, you said no when I called, and I want to honor that, but I just want to make sure that you really mean it because, we've all been indoctrinated, So, if you don't want me to call you again, I won't. But, if you actually might be interested in going out, please just tell me the truth.
Yeah.
And so like, could we have, could that kind of conversation happen?
Of course.
So it's like on both sides, it's like women are taught, you need to be coy.
Hard to get. Play hard to get.
It's like, you can't just say, yeah, I'd love to go out with you. Because then they're like, oh, what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
Too eager. Not very feminine.
Yeah.
Right? 2022, but
Yeah.
That's so true. It trains both sexes on how to act and how to behave in this whole cat mouse thing, and what how people feel secure, and needing to be needed and fought for, and this whole Sleeping Beauty thing, which oh my gosh, I can't even with the Sleeping Beauty references that you have in there, just without consent. Is just it's wild to me. But there was going back to Blonde really quickly in terms of like how we're using all the elements of filmmaking. There was a scene in the beginning or when in the beginning of her career where she is forced into having sex with one of the studio heads in order to basically launch her career. Yeah. And, this is a little aggressive, but down to the decision of sound design, when Marilyn is being forced into the sexual act, they used sound design that would make you think that she was really into it, in terms of the sound effects of the sexual act. And it kind of creates this eroticism around something that's really wrong. Yeah. And I feel like, if as a filmmaker, I thought about this scene and I was taken aback, because I do notice these small elements of the creation of a scene. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that specific sound tells me that there's a part of her that's enjoying this. Yeah. And if I were going to recreate this scene, there would be some other element and certainly some other angles that show that, I would not choose that specific sound effect that would denote pleasure for a female. I don't think that in that situation that would be the case. So, I really appreciate how you really dive into and give several examples from every aspect of filmmaking of how we are objectifying and how we are shaping the narrative of women, of who we are, how we're seen, and also just how that grows roots in, various aspects of society, including how we're treated in the industry as creatives. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that extra element there.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact sound design in that scene, but I think that sound is really important. we give quite a few examples in Brainwashed on the way that sound, insidiously, gives us messages, like like you brought up, the Blade Runner 1982 scene. I've heard from quite a lot of people. They were like, "Oh, I loved that film. I didn't even realize that scene was constructed that way." Where he's basically being completely violent to her, and then the music changes and it gets really romantic.
Right
before they kiss, and or the scene from Raging Bull, where it's very subtle about who gets heard and who doesn't, and who gets to speak. And it's something that you'd absolutely not notice if you're just sitting in a movie theater and you're being transported, as you said at the very beginning of this, so,
yeah.
Well, I think that's what Catherine Hardwicke was talking about too. I mean, she was talking about lighting and angles, I think, but this sort of subliminal conditioning that happens, and you have to really dissect these scenes for what they are and trying to understand what message the filmmaker is trying to tell the audience. And perhaps the filmmaker themselves, because it becomes part of the visual language, it becomes so confusing that they don't even quite recognize the intent of that specific scene or the sound design,
Right. Or, there's always, there are these two issues which are, kind of interesting to think about, I think, for the issues that we're talking about today. One is intent of the filmmaker, and the other one is this issue of context that I mentioned before. So you could say, like, well, the intent of the filmmaker, like, let's say, people sometimes ask about, like, Teton, which is a woman director, and some people find that film to be, kind of very progressive. But whether you agree with that or not, let's say you can't deny that the opening of that film consists of a woman who is on direct display for the audience in a highly sexualized way, the way the camera is following her and tracking her. So you can say, okay, there was, what was the intent of the director? We don't know. Does it matter what the intent of the director was? Yes, it matters. But at the same time, we are still getting this message coming through of, I'm starting a film with these kind of images, and they infiltrate our consciousness and they permeate our DNA practically, because there's so many of them and they're so similar, and it's interesting because one easy way to kind of do a fast little check all the time is just think, like, how would it have been read if it was not a female at the beginning of Teton, if it was a male dancer, gyrating and, bending over and all this stuff. Okay. And how would we read that? Well, we would read that as a feminized man. We would read that as a gay man. A heterosexual male actor is not going to be shot that way. So then you go like, okay, so intent, is it important? Is it interesting? Yes. Context, is it important? Is it interesting? Yes. But nevertheless, these systems of photography and shot design, they're so insidious, and they're so much everywhere that it seeps in, even if the intention might be quote unquote good, or good and bad is irrelevant. But, the intention was, I don't know, it doesn't really matter in a way what the intention was.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's incredibly complex in the sense that, you'd think that the filmmaker is utilizing these mechanisms in order to draw the viewer in, right? But at the same time, I would assume that's the intent, right? But then at the same time, the fact that the viewer is drawn in is part of the problem. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, like draw in. I mean, so let's say, that's why I'm saying like intent, maybe intent is not what we want to look at, because first of all, we don't, there are also levels of intention. There's conscious intention, there's unconscious intention,
of course,
like who knows what the intention is, but let's just look at, what the result is, what we see on the screen. So we see, so supposedly, Blonde, the intention was to do a Me Too movement, so who cares about the intention, right? I mean, when we are looking at Marilyn Monroe's behind as she moves forward, to meet someone for lunch, we're getting a different kind of message,
right.
But it's more complicated when we look at a film, by a woman director who, do we know, I mean, and it doesn't break down by male, female, although it, like Bell Hooks says, patriarchy has no gender. There are women who have a lot of internalized misogyny, and there are men who are, on the forefront of liberation. And so, but let's say that, probably more likely that a woman director would be more attuned to some of these issues. It's likely, but nevertheless, if a scene is shot like Catherine Hardwicke said, we want that actress to look beautiful and in a soft light, and the actress herself wants to look that way. Sure. So it's very it goes really deep.
Yeah, it's almost like these ways that we have been capturing our subjects is a little outdated, and we're kind of at this point where people need to feel safe to be experimental with showing these alternate views. And I think that, doing that maybe they aren't going to get the awards, maybe they aren't going to get the recognition, but I don't think that it means that the scene loses its depth. And in fact, I agree with you. It's almost like we're losing a complete element of what's happening in a scene by just consistently filming in these same angles, the same way. It's like it's monotonous. It's almost become boring at some point. Well, what's next? What's new?
Well, that was something that that's something that I think is really important what you're saying, because the idea of the quote male gaze, and what was interesting to me about putting this film together is that you see that so many directors over decades and across genres and all different kinds of films have the same way of showing desire, have the same way of shooting sex, have the same way of doing it. And you're like, well, that's really kind of boring, right? So this reality is that, we as individuals, as much as we've internalized all of this stuff, and we all have, but nevertheless, we as individuals, we probably have our own kind of personal way of falling in love with someone. Maybe you fall in love with them because like you saw them writing poetry in a cafe, and the way that they moved their hand just page, and the way they looked up sort of was very moving. I don't know, I'm just trying to make up something that's not about the shape of her ass, right? So everyone, and so these kind of different kind of ways that you might think about someone whose desire that you desire, and the whole concept that it could be two subjects desiring each other, what that might look like, what that might feel like, is is something that we need to explore. So that's why I do like the term male gaze to describe the monolithic approach that has been used, which is what I show in Brainwashed, but I do not like the term female gaze because I don't want another monolithic approach. I feel like we should all, try to break out of these categories, and have our individual, feeling about the world, experience of the world, start to be expressed, and so I just want to kind of make that point about monolithicness of it, as you were saying.
Yeah, it's almost like sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to ask. Oh no, it's okay. No, I was going to ask if you can name any films that come to mind that have a more inclusive and more nuanced approach.
Well, there are quite a few films. Recently, I mean, I included quite a bit of, I think like 25 examples in Brainwashed of films that, do things differently, Eliza Hittman's film about abortion, rarely, sometimes always, she made a film about two young women. One, has to get an abortion. They're like teenagers, and the entire film is from their point of view, their experience. They're never objectified. They're both very beautiful, and they're young teenage women. But it's never. We never are in that other perspective. It's very much them, and it's very much their truly their view on the world and their experience. And there are a lot of wonderful moments in that film which are acutely from the girl's point of view. I remember there's one scene where, I don't know if you guys have seen the film, but there's one scene where one of the girls is making out with a guy who she doesn't really want to make out with for various reasons, and the other girl sort of comes down the hallway, and there's this beautiful moment where they kind of surreptitiously hold hands. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but it's dramatically not the male gaze, the whole film, top to bottom. Script, character, and camera work as one example. And certainly Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was about two women subjects. And in fact, that whole movie is about the issue of, two women being subjects and not being objects, and not wanting to be objects and sort of being forced into being objects. So that's the whole topic of that entire film. So, I mean, those are just two examples that come to mind, but there are many. I think that women have been, mainly women, have been pushing back on this kind of filmmaking really, since forever, but mostly have not had the opportunity to even make films, so we've lost so much by having a completely male dominated industry for decades.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I was on Netflix the other day, and how they'll have, oh, here's comedy section, here's drama. They had a section labeled films directed by women. And I was like, oh, interesting. I start scrolling through, and I'm like, 20, 30 films deep. Every single one of them was, could be labeled as a female-driven piece of content. And, it's almost like, is that all that we're relevant for? So when you talk about, how this even, has roots in females being hired for specific content, well, I think it's a beautiful thing that we're getting those opportunities. I myself am always thinking, well, why can't I direct the male driven piece? It's like if it's a Lincoln commercial, Matthew McConaughey is driving the car. I have no running car footage on my reels, so I'm not relevant for the piece. So I'm not even looked at for the opportunity. However, if it's that same vehicle, same brand, and it's a mom driving and it's about a safety feature on the vehicle, all of a sudden my vagina makes me relevant for the piece. Oh, we'd love to hire Columbia. It's just sort of ridiculous, honestly.
Well, that just shows you that's such a great example of these, it's like that's just a great example of how ridiculous the whole thing is. But it's just, I mean, I guess we have to say, well, we made a little progress because at least women are more being hired to direct women content, although Blonde being, an extreme example, of course, that you can't believe that they didn't, think that this story should have been written and directed by women, and that was an interesting choice. At this point in history, it was a very interesting choice.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that the things that I tell myself, I remind myself is that, I think a lot of people in Hollywood, they are waiting for someone to approve of them, for them to be given the opportunity. But as creators, like, nobody's waiting for us to create. We really just have to go out there and ring our own bell and say, this is who I am. So I think, for me as a filmmaker who's also a woman, like I would say to other females, it's like, well, just, stop waiting for the opportunity, because we're not yet in a place in this industry where it's going to be just freely given, perhaps as it has been to men in the past. So, it really doesn't take a lot to go and get out there and just make a film, so, you don't have to have all these bells and whistles to have an impactful story. So just, let's go, let's do it. But I really appreciated how you were saying, like, maybe there's this example of, how somebody falls in love, like, what does that look like to you? Like, it could be, all of these intricacies of this intimate moment. It doesn't have to just be filmed and shot and told this one way. And while we're so accustomed to filming it in this one way, it's really beautiful how you're saying, when we humanize the situation and the story and the characters, they actually become more relatable. I think it enriches things, and that we shouldn't be in fear of, like, experimenting a little bit. And really, we're supposed to be, as creatives, saying, like, this is our lens. This is how I experience this. This is how I feel it. I think it actually gives us a little bit more freedom.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, are there any other, like, actionable things that you think that, us as an industry can be doing to help create this kind of change that we need to see?
Well, I think, obviously a huge piece is hiring practices. And I think we are seeing some progress. It's definitely noticeable that we've seen some, although we still have a long way to go. I mean, all the biggest budget films are still reserved for men. And, there's still a lot of resistance. I think another problem, I think, frankly, that we're having right now is this sort of, serpent that eats its own tail kind of situation with the algorithms of the streamers. I'm not an expert on it, but it's kind of like nobody wants to take a risk because they're so scared about their dollar. So it's like, well, this worked before, starting with the sexualized woman, spreading her legs and zooming in. That was always a good way to start a film. So let's just keep doing it,
Right.
So how, to make a completely bold statement that will is like, let's look at how Europe has filmmaking funds, in France, in England, all over Europe. They have funds that the government supports innovative art making on the level of cinema. Right. So somebody who wants to do something that's interesting and beautiful that might not make huge amounts of money, is able to be financed through these, all the big names out of Europe that we know, male and female, whether it's Werner Herzog or Claire Denis, Agnes Varda, all these people were supported by cultural funding for their work. That's how we got those films. If those people had lived in LA and they had to go to try to break through the cement walls around CAA and find someone to give them money, we wouldn't even know their names today. And it's bizarre that in this country, where supposedly we're the richest, most powerful country in the world, that there's no support for the arts coming, that's not dictated by brute capitalism.
Right.
So that's like a call to legislators and creatives to think like, why can't we do that here too? So, okay, we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying it should be blotted out, but make some room for other kinds of film. And, film is expensive. It's not poetry, where all you need is a pencil and a piece of paper. It is expensive. So, and it's the most important art form, I would argue, of our time, cinema. So how is it possible that, our government puts exactly $0 into it?
Yeah. I mean, getting that funding would be amazing. I mean, on the other hand, like, as filmmakers, what do you think we can be doing?
Well, as filmmakers within this system is what you mean? Within the existing system?
Correct.
Well, I think, try to I think there are a lot of different situations. There's commercials, there's TV, there's feature films, there are different demands that come down on the creatives. I mean, independent filmmaking is really difficult in this country, and it tends not to be profitable. So it's hard for me to answer that. I mean, if you make a film like Brainwashed, like I did, it's pretty much a labor of love. It's not like I got paid,
right,
a salary that I could live on. So if you're in a situation where you have some creative freedom, then you can do what you can, and if you don't have creative freedom, then what are you supposed to do? That's why I'm really saying that, we need an overhaul where the idea that cinema as a completely essential and influential art form, needs to be supported in a way out of the nonprofit sector, out of the government, like France, like the UK, like Belgium, like Germany, Austria, all those countries have film funds. You can get $5 million to make something really innovative.
Wow.
How are you going to convince Netflix to let you experiment, right?
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right. And even if you do go make it on your own, they may not take it.
That's correct.
Oh, man. Yeah. It's tough. Are there any other questions or things that you're receiving right now from other people after watching the film that you would want to mention or just kind of put out there?
Well, I think we really touched on most of it. Like I said, some of the main things that people sort of get bogged down on is, well, the context, made it okay, or the context gave it another way to read, or the intention, but we talked about that quite a bit. So I think that, what we are talking about in Brainwashed, and it's quite radical, is let's just look at the meta message of the shot design and not look at those other things. And then what do you see? So that's something that I've heard. And then I've also just had women, frankly, come up to me in tears and weeping and saying, thank you for articulating something that I felt, and I didn't have words to really explain. Like this whole subject object thing, it seems on a certain level, it seems obvious, but it's not obvious, and it's not obvious the way that trickles down into our lives and into our consciousness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was my exact response. And I myself am a filmmaker, and I never really grasp it. And I agree. You articulate it very well. And the examples are just, they're just there. They're solid. It's really undeniable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, Nina, thanks for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate really appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Thank you so much. And I think you guys know that the film is opening on Friday in New York and LA. So tell your friends to go see it, because we are brute capitalism here, so we got to pack the house if we want the film to soar.
Yeah, of course.
So, yes.
We'll spread the message.
Congrats on such an amazing and powerful, important film. I really respect you and appreciate you for
Right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you next time.